So she continues talking about what the myths and misconceptions phase is for the next few paragraphs, for the rest of the section given to it. But she does this in an interesting way, and it has to do with how she's structuring and shifting between the formal and the informal. Structuring and sequencing and blending between, which is really all just to say hybridizing the academic and the personal, or the formal and the informal, or you might even think of it as research with experience, or report of other information with narration of one's own, lived information. So, as we already discussed, she first defines the stage by referentially supporting it with definition, work and insights from other scholars, and using that as the academic and formal and research-based grounds to then bring in her own story and set that in relation to this more formal base. So by bringing in her own personal experiences, especially with the use of pronouns like my and I, she's using her own character to, further define or really extend the definition that she set in motion by beginning with the formal academic and research foundation and approach. But not only is the section hybridized like this, even the sentences have the same hybridization within them. Here's an example of that. She says, I was taught grammar and therefore writing because at that time I was told that writing and grammar were inseparable in a way that overemphasized and overassessed mechanical correctness. And here it is, as described by Connors. She's reading this article by Connors and then seeing that as able to resonate with her own experiences. So what does she do? She identifies what those experiences are, puts them on paper, sequences them in a way that leads back to where the idea came from. So you can imagine it as, this is not necessarily how things unfolded in the course of her composing this, but I think it's effective as an illustration. And I'm imagining it or presuming it to have been prompted by her reading Connors as part of this research project. I think it's a cool idea to be studying an article, to let that trigger a personal experience, but to be able to recognize what's going on and grab hold of that experience before it just drifts away, put it down, and then try and trace it back to where it was prompted from. I guess in this case from her reading Connors or whatever it might be. In that way, it's a hybridization, but it's also a bringing full circle, right? Throughout the piece, she has more of these hybridizations at the sentence level, and I suppose what I'll do here is send you on a sort of treasure hunt to look for those and record those as representative points of this idea of hybridizing between the formal and the informal, so that you can become more familiar with those. Each time you find a new example, the idea of hybridizing the formal and the informal, or the personal with the impersonal, or like your own story with some researched element, it recurs, right? And recursion starts to reify into this repeatable experience. You do that enough and you can start to take hold of it, and it becomes a tool in your writer's toolbox. All right, so moving on to the next stage, cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance in the realm of psychology is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change. In this phase, in the cognitive dissonance phase, the writer begins to suspect that something is wrong with the way they have been taught writing, but has no knowledge about language to back up their hunch. They can sense that there is a problem, but cannot articulate what the problem is. So they're like, I think just something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right. I'm unsettled, but I don't know why. I need to define it. I need to articulate what that problem is. This stage is interesting because the possibility of escaping the myths and misconceptions phase and getting into the recursion of those final two healthier stages, that possibility is increasing, right? But it's not guaranteed. It's not a probability yet. It's just a possibility, even though the odds are starting to acquire more potential energy, right, to be activated, hopefully. So yeah, in this phase, the writer begins to suspect that something is wrong with the way they have been taught writing, but has no knowledge about language to back up their hunch. They can sense that there is a problem, but cannot articulate what the problem is. They are frustrated because they lack the resources to find a better way, or maybe they haven't been given the resources or any kind of awareness to find them. And so continue on as they always have, only now with the creeping dissatisfaction at the back of their mind. Like you're coming to the end of a movie and you're hoping for the resolution to occur, but it just never happens. There's no resolution, and it's very dissatisfying. That's frustrating, right? Inarticulation yields frustration, which in turn yields no change. And no change is the same thing as saying a return to restriction. It's not being able to achieve enough escape velocity and get out of that cycle of recursion and on to the next stage. Yeah. Watching TED Talks, as I am very prone to do, especially in the mornings over coffee, they're a great way to start the day, I'll tell you that. I found an example of what this looks like in a TED Talk given by Adam Driver. You may recognize this guy here if you've seen any of the recent Star Wars movies. He plays Kylo Ren. I'll let you watch this on your own, but essentially he's just communicating in a different manner this idea of inarticulation yielding frustration, but finally achieving articulation allows you to breathe and get closer to that resolution for real instead of it just fading away as this unfulfilled possibility. But describing something for the first time that before was indescribable, he felt positive change occurring for himself as he was able to put words into feelings for the first time. Feelings inarticulated can be unsatisfying, or to do that, to put thoughts into words or put feelings into words and to make that transaction really occur, you start to realize, wow, like this is a really valuable tool. Hannah says, contradiction was everywhere. Yeah, if you're trying to articulate something, the last thing you want to do is keep encountering contradiction after contradiction, right? And I can only imagine that this string of continued encounters with contradiction reinforced the likelihood of falling back into this state of cognitive dissonance. She says, it was upsetting because I felt that I disagreed with how I had been taught and how states and schools teach writing, but I had no idea why I felt that way. She's looking for an idea. And beyond the idea, to start to understand why it's making her feel the way she does. And finally, she says, I could not provide any evidence. It was just a feeling, but an irksome one that would not leave me alone. You can imagine it might have left her alone if she was able to put it into words and to understand it, or to put it to apply an idea to it, right? And that leads us into the next stage, the third stage, building understanding. Opening her definition here, she says, that feeling, the irksome one from the cognitive dissonance stage that wouldn't leave her alone, that feeling propelled her into the next stage, building understanding, in which the writer's perspective on writing shifts as they finally find alternatives to the way they have been taught. They begin to unlearn the harmful and incorrect things they have been told about language and writing. They start to view the rules they grew up with as a set of tools, not absolutes, and see how they can be applied in different situations to improve the complexity and appropriateness of their writing. They understand that grammar and editing are not writing, and that different texts use different formats and language. They gain knowledge of the writing process and the way people learn to write. It's almost like she's describing a kind of enlightenment, except for writing, Building understanding is largely a process of unlearning damaging ideas. of making corrections and filling in gaps and seeing clearly for the first time what was always just blurry blankness. So rules become tools. Instead of absolutes, they become just things you can use to get the job done. I have come to see writing as a way of discovering and creating meaning. Whoa, that's a sea change. That is a total perspective shift, right? A metamorphosis has truly occurred if she went from seeing writing as this unattainable thing that, was forever away from her to this thing that she can build toward and use purposely and intentionally beyond the prescriptivist bounds given to her as the absolutes before. We can do things like discover and create and make meaning through both of those, and even more, And this is why writing is generative, why it allows for invention to occur. You can invent through writing. Invention takes place. In short, writing is not sitting alone for a few hours, plucking out some words, proofreading, and calling it good. It's a vibrant, many-tiered process that involves much more than just one person trying to transcribe their thoughts on paper. Yeah, I love that sentence, because not only is it a call-out, it's a correction, right? It's like this statement of revelation. In short, I've realized that writing, it's not sitting alone for a few hours, just plucking out some words and then proofreading and calling it good enough to submit or whatever. No. It's much more than that. It's vibrant. It's many-tiered. There's all these processes and they're overlapping and stacking and morphing and just moving together in very interesting ways that we can manage and maintain and discover and use to create. That process, it involves much more than just me, than just one person trying to transcribe my thoughts on paper. No, writing is collaborative. It happens across contexts. It happens between people. And it doesn't have to be just paper. It doesn't have to be just thoughts. It can be feelings. It can be other modes and means of recording expression and thinking and research, etc. It's limitless. And finally, we've reached the fourth stage, applying new ideas. Here, the writer starts to put the things they have learned to use in their own writing. It's not just the revelation and the realization anymore, it's the practice and that real development. They're developing their own writing process. You're taking charge, you're building autonomy. You're getting a handle on something that was elusive and unobtainable to you before. But now it's yours. You're owning it and you're possessing it. It's like one of those little wheels that you've memorized that you're becoming more and more familiar with, maybe to the point of mastery. You know techniques. You can start to view other people's writing through a new lens, through writing published by scholars, through writing given to you by peers, your friends, your family, whoever, emails, wherever it's happening. Language is being used all around us, all the time, and in one way or another, it's crafted. Making this chain of the third and fourth stage of building, understanding, and applying new ideas, making that a chain of recursion, a habit, right? That's the ultimate goal, because once you habitualize reaching for new ways and putting them into practice and trying to build knowledge and build that even more and increase it through application and start to see composition as just everything that's happening around us all the time, this constant structuration of culture and society and language and everything else, arts, it just keeps extending outward and outward. And that's cool. It's mysterious. And where there's mystery, there's... So, before I get too kind of a love letter to writing for y'all, let me just drive this final point home by kind of partial quote on the slide here. The original quote is, "Once I was able to let go of the need to always write perfectly, I was able to be much more productive and create a more useful first draft with lots of content I can pull from and rearrange." But I like stopping it at B because I think that captures like the larger notion at work here. Once I was able to let go of the need to always write perfectly, I was able to just be. There weren't so many worries pinning her down and restricting her from the movement that she felt called to, It's just a really nice way of thinking about it. So finally, we'll talk about the last section in the article, and that is implications for teaching. So this really speaks to me, but I want y'all to hear this too. Implications for teaching. So applying new ideas creates space for strategizing how to forward those ideas to others. That's what I'm doing here, trying to apply new ideas, build my understanding of them first, of course, by researching and reading, and doing that constantly and broadly in various capacities. Even though I'm the teacher and this is implications for teaching, it also speaks to y'all because we're going to do peer-to-peer collaboration. And even if we're not doing that directly, like in live groups, face-to-face in class, you can still think of this as a way to help each other out, to forward an idea to one of your classmates about how they might improve their writing, or even just to start a conversation. Create productive conversation with your classmates about writing. Just PM somebody and be like, hey, I was thinking about this article and this is what I think. I was wondering if you had any thoughts and maybe we could, exchange sentiments or something. I don't know. Talking about writing is very important, though. I don't want to be the only one talking to y'all, and I don't want teachers being the only people talking to y'all about writing. That separates it from a more real reality, you know what I mean? So, I got to ask you this. You can email me about this or let me know however, but really think about this for a second. Have your English or writing teachers, have they ever shared with you something that they wrote? Have they ever let you look at their writing process? Usually when I ask this question, if there's a class of 25 students, maybe a couple, 3 at most, will raise their hands and say, yeah, my English teacher showed me something they wrote. But the vast majority consistently don't raise their hands. So believe me, I will be sharing some writing with y'all, and I'm going to let you look at my process. So in this same section, she also talks about the importance of something called mentor texts. This concept is something that we'll get into in a lot greater detail soon enough, reading a couple of articles about it specifically. But, you can see this article by Hannah as a kind of mentor text because it's establishing this way for you to measure where you are, to locate yourself along a sequence of definable stages. And finally, I guess the take-home message, even though there's a lot more to take home than this, the emphasis in writing classrooms should always be on the process. Not on the product, not on the superficial, not on the prescriptivist, not on the rules. On the process. On the development. On the change over time. And what's really going on when you write.